This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. This is one of those conversations that I did not expect to have. So I go back to America for around Christmas time 2022. I end up at a place called the Vienna Inn, which is quite famous in the Washington, D.C. area. And I met with 7 or 8 high school friends. One of them was a guy named Frank Fumich, my guest today. My first high school friend to have on this podcast. Now, you might be thinking I'm a homer, I'm just having my friend on. No. Not that at all. Frank is an adventurer. Frank runs marathons. Frank runs ultra marathons. Frank skis the South Pole. Frank climbs mountains. Frank does he's not going to describe it as insane. I guess I don't describe it as insane after talking with him. But for the average person, Frank does pretty insane shit. And you know what? There's something to be learned from somebody that can endure the pain, that can achieve these crazy endurance goals. Without any further delay, without any further buildup from me, let's jump right into a conversation with a friend of mine, Frank Fumich, and talk about his adventurizing across this planet. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Frank Fumich. Frank, take me back in time. You are what I guess I would affectionately call an adventurer. I will have to define that in a second, but maybe even before we define it, the reason that I wanted to talk to you, and I would have wanted to talk to you even if I hadn't known you for 40 years, but you're on an elevator and you want to give people the greatest hits of your adventurizing for the last, I don't know how many years. We're going to go back to the beginning in a second, but what do you tell people? Like, give me the quick run through, the total bike rides, the total runs, the total swims. Is there a way that you can define this quickly for an audience that's not familiar with you yet?
Probably not. I mean, if I'm on an elevator ride, I would just say, I basically search out the hardest events, races, and adventures on the planet and see if I can do them.
So 6 of the 7 continents, the highest peaks, the highest mountains, you climb those.
Correct.
You've got Everest left to do.
Correct. Which will take some negotiating with my wife, of course. But yes, that's definitely on the list.
A lot of these things I've never heard of. So they're just amazing to look at the total distances. A bike ride of 3,000 miles. And I think the ones that catch me, I mean, the long distance running. What's the longest you've run?
So the longest race I've run is 350 miles. And, it's not just the distance, it's where it is.
I'm looking at your list. There's multiple deserts here.
Right. So the 350 miler was from the Arctic Circle, basically, to the Arctic Ocean in northwestern Canada. It's not just the distance, it's what kind of temperatures and environment you're facing. I mean, because you can run 100 miles flat, 70 degrees, and of course it's hard, but it's not crazy hard. But when you're running 350 miles and it's minus 40 degrees, it's pretty difficult.
Frank, let's take a step back here. Running 100 miles in San Diego weather is hard for 99.999% of humanity that's ever walked the earth.
True, true.
I don't know how we would describe ourselves. We weren't really close friends, but we were close friends with people that were close, that kind of thing. But we ran in the same circle. I think the same circle of like 20 guys when we were in high school. So what was your athletic pursuit back when you were a teenager? It's nothing like what you're doing now. I know that.
No, nothing at all. I mean, I was always actually a pretty coordinated kid, but never a big kid. I didn't really love team sports because I didn't want to be hemmed down to a schedule. I was kind of like a surfer mentality where I liked doing individual stuff, but I was always playing basketball, pickup games. And in high school, I didn't join the football team until I was a sophomore. In college, I played like every intramural sport possible. But obviously, 99% of high school kids aren't good enough to play in college. And so that was sort of my thing. I was very athletic, but I didn't play a ton of team sports.
Honestly, the longest I've ever run is probably 7 or 8 miles, which is probably longer than most people.
Probably.
It's embarrassing to talk to you, but look, I've got some athletic feats that I can still do. I can still do full splits. So there you go.
That's impressive. I couldn't even do a half split. So you got me there.
So, okay, if we're going to unpack all this adventurizing that you've been doing, it starts with something. It starts with some motivation, some trigger. When did this distance running start for you?
I can tell you exactly when it was. It was a few months before my 30th birthday. And it was a thing that started. Actually, my cousin, Mike Harris, who also went to high school with us, I don't know if you remember him, his mom, my aunt, my mom's sister, was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor when I was almost 30. We went to a Catholic high school, and my family grew up a close Catholic family. Everybody was, praying for her. I think we all knew an inoperable brain tumor, how that was going to turn out. And I just thought, she was in a lot of pain and discomfort, and misery loves company. I mean, not in that sense, but when you're feeling that kind of pain and discomfort, I think you get a little comfort in knowing that other people are maybe going something with you. So I told her, as a non-runner, I was going to sign up for the Marine Corps Marathon here in DC and put myself in a bit of pain and offer it up for her. That's what I did. I was a total non-runner. I think the longest I had ever run, and maybe a couple times, was like 6 miles, but I was not a runner. And back then, nowadays you got to sign up for marathons and the Marine Corps Marathon months and months in advance. But back then it was fairly simple. So I just signed up 2.5 months before the marathon, from 0 miles to the marathon. And that's how it started.
What did you do? Was there prep training?
I think I just did it on my own. Every weekend I would run a mile longer. I think I started off with like a 6 mile run. And then the next weekend I did 7. I would run a little bit during the week and just work my way up. I think the longest run I did was maybe 18 miles a couple weeks before the marathon, and then showed up and ran my 26.2 miles. I also had a friend, my college buddy who was living with me, who bet that I could never do it under 4 hours. So I had that, I just wanted to finish for my aunt, but I had that little voice in my head of my buddy saying, dude, there's no way you're going to ever finish under 4 hours, spinning around in my head. And so I was determined to prove him wrong. As a non-runner and first-time marathoner, I finished in 3:50, which is actually pretty good. And I literally collapsed at the finish line, and the Marines carried me off on a stretcher. I mean, I was just totally exhausted and dropped and had nothing left. Recovered, on the grass next to the Marine Corps Memorial. And that was my start of running.
This is, almost 25 years ago?
25 years ago, you're right.
Talk about weight for a second, your physical weight. So you're going to jump into this process. I know when I've done any kind of distance running, I know what happens to my weight. It starts to just disappear.
Right.
What was the transformation in your body as you started this process 25 years ago?
Well, actually not much, because in 2.5 months, I didn't train properly. Back then, I was still partying, drinking beers with buddies most nights. And when the funny thing is, I've stumbled on some pictures, my finishing pictures, and I was way heavier than I was now. I mean, back then I lifted weights. That was what I did for physical exercise. I didn't do any cardio. So I was probably close to 190, and right now I'm 172. So yeah, back then there was no body transformation.
190 would have been pretty big for you. How tall are you? 5'11", 6 foot?
No, 5'9".
So 190, you're pretty thick at 190.
I was, yeah. I mean, I was pretty muscular, actually, but I was definitely not lean. I was not a lean runner, that's for sure.
When you finish that, what are your immediate takeaways?
Well, my first thought, of course, which is the same as most first-time marathons, was I'm never doing that again. I didn't immediately, but almost immediately, I just couldn't get over the fact that so many miles before the finish, my body really felt like I couldn't go any further, but how my brain just kept making my legs move. So I was totally intrigued with the mind over matter thing and how your brain is capable of just pushing yourself. That's when the seed was planted for this last 25 years. Just how your mind can keep yourself going and how you're capable of doing way more than you think you are. I mean, most people, if you ask a non-runner if they could run a marathon, they would be like, oh, no way. But everybody, barring some major physical handicap, can run a marathon. Like, everyone is capable of doing 10 times what they think they are. So that early seed was planted in my head then.
What did you start to learn, though, about navigating pain?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it also is stubbornness. No matter what you're feeling in the pain, just refusal to stop. Not on that first one, because that's basically the first time you've ever felt that way. And so it's tough when you're new to it because you don't know what you're capable of. You start feeling things you've never felt before and you think, oh man, something like serious is going wrong here. But really, it's just any number of pains and aches and joints that are hurting.
Over the next 10 years, was it only more marathons, only increasing the distance? When did you start to go beyond the marathoning?
I don't think I did another marathon for like 2 years, actually. I went back to my happy hours and partying and didn't immediately get back into it. I think I did one more marathon, and then immediately I heard about a 50 miler here in Virginia and I signed up for it. So I do a 50 miler. And at the 50 miler, so I run 50 miles and I just can't believe I ran 50 miles. And I come to see and learn that a bunch of people are doing the 50 and they're going back out and doing a second out and back and are running 100 milers. I didn't even know 100 miles existed until I was at the 50 miler. And I was totally blown away that as bad as I felt, there's a bunch of people that were going to do twice the distance. And so immediately I felt like a total loser that I just did 50 and people were doing twice as much.
So the first one around age 30, when did you do the 50?
Probably 2 years later.
So that seems like a jump. What was the extra struggle when you're doubling the marathon distance?
It's twice of everything. I mean, when you're doing a 50, you can't just show up, quote unquote, like you can or you could a marathon. I mean, pretty much anybody with enough pain tolerance could survive and stumble through a marathon. But when you do a 50, you just got to start getting serious and watching your calories and learn a little bit more about endurance and plan it out. You can't just show up and run a 50 miler if you don't want to end up in a hospital.
But what were you doing in those 2 years, though, to prep yourself for a 50?
Well, I wasn't really doing anything in the 2 years. When I decided to sign up for the 50, maybe 4 months or so before, I started to get serious and obviously started to run more, watch my nutrition, wasn't just drinking water, I was drinking some sort of sports drink and that type of thing. So I was definitely taking a little more serious, but I still wasn't taking it that seriously. When I look back at a picture, I'm literally running in board shorts in like a tank top. I still didn't really know what I was doing, but I was taking it a little more seriously.
By that time, early on in this Frank adventurizing, did you have any physical advantage that you were learning about?
No physical advantage. No, I'm just a totally average person and everything I do takes tons of work and nothing comes easy. No advantages. Only disadvantages, probably.
Okay, we're to keep moving this along the timeline because it's just a fascinating adventure career. What were you learning about gear, shoes and socks and that kind of stuff? Was there any lessons there or was that all just irrelevant? Because look, you're running 50 miles. I'm imagining you've a guy that's had to learn about broken skin, blisters, cuts, scrapes, everything under the sun that most people might just say, oh shit, I'm not doing any more today. You've had to learn how to navigate all of those kinds of issues.
Yeah, I'm also kind of one of those guys, even today, that doesn't take all that stuff super, super seriously. I mean, of course, now I've got my shoes I run with and I'm a big sweater, so I'm a chafer and I make sure I lube. But back then I still was kind of showing up with the miles under my belt, but I wasn't a gearhead. I was still running in board shorts, like I said, for a 50 miler. I actually did a half Ironman in board shorts once. I have no idea what I was thinking, but I just didn't know any better. And I remember getting some looks and stares. I was always the guy that looks like he didn't belong at the race. I had a different mentality, no pain, no gain kind of thing. And I just went for it. And I basically still always finished, even though I was a little clueless with the gear and the tech stuff.
Tell me about the shoes that you wear today. I mean, when you run today, what shoes do you like to run in?
I switched to Nikes. They're called Next Percent. They came out a couple years ago, but for the 12 years previous, I was running a brand called Hoka's, which were new to running with super cushioning. You remember the whole minimal, well, maybe you don't, you're not a runner, but there was a book came out, and I can't even remember the name of the book.
Born to Run.
Yes, exactly.
Before you insult me and say me that I'm not a runner and I don't know anything about
Sorry,
running.
but you're a reader, I guess. Yeah, so you do know that. And it was about the guy, well, if you read it, but he also highlighted the Mexicans that were down in Mexico running crazy distances, basically barefoot or just with like a one little layer of leather under their feet. And that started the whole barefoot running craze. And everybody went out and was like running with total minimalist shoes and destroying their feet. And even before I heard they were destroying their feet, I was like, the hell with that. There's no way I'm going with less cushioning. And I actually went the other way and got these Hoka shoes, which look like ridiculous moon boots. The first styles of them were so ugly. And I told my wife, I'm not trying to win any fashion shows here. I'm just trying to survive. I wore those for like a dozen years. And then Nike did come out with these super cushioning new shoes. And at a time where my body felt like it was breaking down a little bit. And I bought them and literally stood in my kitchen floor with them. And I was like, oh, wow, these are a game changer. So I've been running with those for a few years now.
So I will say between 08 and 2012, before I came to Asia, I was in San Diego and I was running with a training friend. And I was one of these people that was wearing these minimal New Balance running shoes and destroying my feet. And just to go on your Hoka thing, I do have 2 pairs of Hokas that I will, because I'll still go out to the track and do sprints every week. I don't do any distance, but I just love sprinting.
Wow, that's impressive. So yeah, gear does matter big time, especially in crazy stuff I do.
But the minimal stuff is a no-go from your perspective.
No, not for me. Not now. I mean, at 55, maybe when you're younger and you can take that kind of punishment, but I want to keep doing this as long as I can. Now I'm a little more cognizant of my body breaking down. So yeah, gear does matter now.
Okay, so let's keep it right at that for a second. I think I saw you post something the other day about this. Some of my worst injuries have been hamstring injuries, and usually the way that I've recovered from those have been either yoga or Pilates or just time. Speak to recovery. Even if you're not injured, what is your typical recovery process when you go on an adventure of some sort where you're really pushing the body? What is your typical recovery process? Just go home and hang out and lay down?
I really hate to disappoint you. I am not your normal person. I have never stretched in my life. I've never done yoga in my life, Pilates, nothing. I'm speaking from the 1 in 100 people that doesn't do anything. I mean, if I'm doing like a 100-mile race, the best thing I could do is take an ice bath. But I probably haven't taken an ice bath in 7 years. That would be the thing I recommend for anybody. An ice bath will do wonders. But at this point, no. I'll come home and sit on the couch, or I'll come home and start running.
I've got to push the buttons. I've got to find out what makes you tick, Let me ask this, the big picture question. How many marathons have you done?
127, one in each state, and all the ultra marathons. We'll get into that, I assume, at some point. I've done one of those on all 7 continents, including Antarctica, of course. So yeah, but 127 marathons.
An ultra marathon, is it a set number?
No, anything longer than a marathon is an ultra marathon. So a 50K is an ultra marathon.
How many ultra marathons have you done?
I don't even know. I mean, not as many, but I don't really keep track of those. I mean, dozens, probably. A few dozen, maybe. 50K, 50-miler, 100-miler, 135-miler, and 350-miler. But I've also, I got into the triathlon world because I felt like I had done a lot of the long distance running stuff. Then I wanted to see, well, can I do the ultimate distances of other endurance sports? So that's when I got into triathlons and Ironmans. And coincidentally, an Ironman was the first triathlon distance I ever did. You'd be hard pressed to find someone that their first triathlon was an Ironman. But once again, I learned of it. I didn't want to take the time to work up to it. So I just jumped into that.
You're a good guy in the sense that I know you've raised a lot of money for charities and stuff like that. And going back to your aunt and that story, why you got started. But why do you do this?
Well, yeah, that's how I got started. And now towards the end, I'm doing a lot for charity, but in the middle and still now, man, I just like the challenge. I just like to see if I can do it. When I learn about something and I read about someone doing something crazy, my mind immediately goes to, could I do that? And that's really all it is, the challenge. I love to see if I can do it. And I learned a long time ago that you don't learn anything about yourself by sitting on the couch. Only through some serious pain and adversity are you going to find out what you're really made of. And that's intrigued me for the last 20 some years. And even though now I do a lot of stuff for charity, I also am doing it to see if I could do it. I mean, I'm not running a 5K for charity or a 10-mile or or even a marathon. I'm doing it when I'm really putting myself out there on the edge to see if I can do it. That's when I ask people for money. For the challenge is primarily still why I do stuff. It's that simple, just to see if I can do it. Totally the challenge.
And it's not a competition with anybody else. You're only competing with yourself.
Totally. I mean, sometimes in a race, I am a super competitive person, but I really only feel that urge if I find that somebody's racing with me. Sometimes when you're running a marathon and you pass people, you can notice them speeding up. And that always kind of annoys me because I'm just out there running. But when I see someone is adjusting their speed to me, it's fun to kind of get in a little competition in my head and it motivates me. But no, I'm always just in it against myself.
So when you're competing these days, though, where do you put yourself in terms of trying to win or compete or just complete? How do you view yourself in these events?
I'm just a completer. I do have some goals in my head, like time-wise, just to push myself. And they often change during a race. For instance, 4 hours is kind of my magic number in a marathon. I always like to just eke under 4 hours. I feel like that still means I'm in shape. And of course, it's getting harder and harder to do as I get a little bit older. But sometimes if I start doing the math and I'm like, oh, okay, well, wow, maybe I think I'm on pace for a 350. And then that becomes my number. It's just sort of arbitrary things that my OCD brain keeps making myself push myself harder. But I'm in it just to complete. People are running crazy fast marathons. And so I'm never in a marathon to win it. My God. But I still, generally speaking, my finishes are certainly in the top quarter or top third of my age group. My goal is just to complete, not compete to place or anything.
I got to poke on something you just said. And you said your OCD brain. I think I've started this podcast in 2012. So I did a documentary film in 06, 07. I interviewed 100 people for that. And this podcast has probably been 600 or 700 interviews. So a lot of interviews. You're the first person that's acknowledged or admitted that they've got an OCD brain. They probably do, but you just openly said it. So now I have to pull on that string a little bit to find out what that means.
Well, I've just noticed my own behavior of being a little bit obsessive compulsive about, just like I just said, if my goal is to run 4 hours and I just find myself running a little bit faster, I can't help but come up with another number to push myself even further. I can't seem to just run a marathon and enjoy it at a leisurely pace. I feel the compulsion to just go harder and, leave absolutely everything out there. And I wish I wasn't like that because I actually don't enjoy the races because frankly, they hurt so much. Even a marathon, a 10 miler could hurt like hell if you just ran it in a sprint. So it's not really the distance. It's how hard you push yourself. If I just jogged along a marathon and finished in 5.5 hours, it would be pretty easy. And I wish I could do that. I would enjoy it, but I somehow can't control myself and constantly pushing myself to make it as painful as I can. Yeah, I've obviously done some self-analyzing and reflecting and realized, man, I do have, and it's not just running, it's in my business, it's everything. I'm always feeling the compulsion to push. And so I think there is something a little clinical. I use it to my benefit. It's made me pretty successful, but it's sometimes I wish I wasn't like that because, there really is no rest. As soon as you do something, it's boom, the compulsion of what's next, bigger, longer, harder. I guess there's a sort of a bad side to it, but yeah, I'm pretty sure there's definitely some OCD work in here.
I saw you make the comment somewhere, maybe it was in a text or it was on your Facebook, something about, well, you might as well do it now because the coffin's coming soon, something to that effect.
Right. Do it now, rest when you're dead, or one of those things.
Yeah. Let me shift you. You just got back, and it's one of the ugliest things I've seen. And I shared it with a Vietnamese friend of mine who is a climber and married to a Thai guy, and they're both climbers and adventure types, but not at your level. But she immediately saw the picture and she's like, oh, shit, I hope that thumb comes back. Let's talk about how you got black thumb and where you just were somewhere, I believe the South Pole, yeah?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been trying to do for probably 20 years is the whole 7 summits, climbing the highest mountain on all 7 continents, and skiing at least the last degree of latitude to the South Pole. It's a quote unquote thing called the Explorers Grand Slam or the Adventurers Grand Slam, some people call it. I've done 6 of the 7 summits. I've skied the North Pole, and I just got back from skiing to the South Pole.
Are these events typically set up? Because there is a demand for folks like yourself that want to go do these things. So there are programs or whatnot you can sign up for that'll help you take care of everything. Yeah, something like that?
Yeah, it's not a race, it's an expedition. And it's a paid expedition where you hire a company that takes care of all your logistics, and you have a guide who just happens to be a college fraternity brother of mine who's a polar explorer. So him and his company guided us to the North Pole, and I used him again for the South Pole.
What's the pricing to go do something like this adventure you just did in the South Pole?
Yeah, it's not cheap. That's for sure.
25 grand, 50 grand, 10 grand?
It's a little more than all three of those, 75 grand. So when you go there, you know that you're meeting other people that are, pushing it in life in all aspects and that can afford it. So it's an interesting group of type A'ers, but it's not cheap. Unfortunately, not everybody can do it unless you can get sponsors, which is almost impossible to do.
Explain the process. Okay, you're going to where? Argentina? No, going to Chile first, right?
Yeah, you're going to Chile. Well, you can go across. Nowadays, tourism down there is booming. So you could take a cruise ship across the Drake Passage, quote unquote cruise ship. And I've actually taken a ship across there years ago on my first trip, but it was like on a Russian boat and it was pretty gnarly. But nowadays, most people fly from Punta Arenas, Chile, and you fly into Union Glacier, Antarctica. And the ALE, a company down there, runs this. Basically, it's like a massive camp. So you fly into there, and that's sort of your staging ground for all things Antarctica. You can fly to climb Mount Vinson, which I've done, or you can fly and be dropped off and begin some distance cross-country skiing to the South Pole. I mean, you can do some other stuff too, but...
Which is what you did.
Yeah. So I flew into Union Glacier, then we got on a small prop plane. I flew in on it used to be an Ilyushin, like a Russian military plane that wasn't pressurized, and you're wearing your down jacket and ear things because it's super loud. But tourism, like I said, is booming so much that you're literally now, I couldn't believe it, we flew in on a 757 Iceland airplane with flight attendants, which is totally hand out snacks. I mean, we're sitting there in our crazy boots and all our gear, and there's a flight attendant pushing a thing down the aisle. It was hysterical. We fly in there commercially, and then we get on little prop planes, and you wait for the weather. And when the weather is okay, they flew us out. It was another maybe 4-hour flight, and they dropped us off at the 89th parallel and took off and left us there. And it was a totally self-supported. There was a group of 9 of us, 7 clients and 2 guides, all our gear. We each had a sled to pull, maybe about 100 pounds, and we had cross-country skis. And lots of people are saying, well, did you practice cross-country skiing? The only time I had ever had cross-country skis on my feet was when I skied to the North Pole, and it was 10 years in between. And the second time I put them on was skiing to the South Pole. So it was, once again, a little bit of that jumping into it, because really, how hard is cross-country skiing? At least that's what you think.
When you get there, what's the total distance you're cross-country skiing to get to the South Pole?
70 miles. So it's not really that far. Yeah, it's not crazy.
But the temperature
is crazy, dude. It's like, I think the air temperature was minus 22 to about minus 30 Fahrenheit. And we were super lucky, and we had what they would consider perfect South Pole Antarctica weather. And it was sunny almost every day with very little wind. One day we had about a 10-mile-an-hour wind, and that put the wind chill, though, down around minus 40 or less. So it's definitely super cold. It's not like you're walking outside your house when it's minus 20. I mean, you're spending a week 24/7, you're sleeping in tents. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds to be living outside in those temperatures for a week.
Give me back to your thumb. This gnarly picture. Is the thumb is going to survive?
The thumb will be okay. It looks gnarly. Even it's almost looking worse every day before it's getting better. But I've been to a doctor, and I'm literally sending pics of my thumb every day to her, and she's sort of monitoring it. And it's still okay. It hurts like a son of a bitch, though. I mean, last night it kept me up till about 1 a.m, and I finally woke up and went and popped a couple Tylenol just to take the edge off so I could go to sleep. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to permanently lose any tissue. When you're outside in, minus 30 for a week, it's almost hard not to get any type of frostbite. Every single thing you do, you have to plan out. You can almost never take all your gloves off. You got to keep your liners on, but it's also super hard to have the dexterity in your hands to stop and twist your Nalgene cap off, or, rip the bag off a snack bar. And so you have to take your mitts off or your outer gloves. And even with your liners on, you're exposing I'm a sweater, so my gloves would get wet And I think what happened was I would set my mitts down, and I should have zipped them up in my jacket to keep them warm, but I just would put them on the sled for like 2 minutes. But just in those temps, I think it froze the sweat. And then putting my hand back in was like putting my hand in a freezer. And I think that's what caused it.
So we're talking about the thumb appendage. You immediately get me thinking about other appendages that I guess we could lose. We could lose the thumb, but man,
losing something else is big trouble. Oh, every pee break, you had to, plan out like 5 minutes ahead of time. Okay, I'm going to take this glove off. I'm going to do, it's, and you got to pee because you had to drink a ton because we're at altitude. You get dehydrated faster. And obviously anything, we're pulling for like 8 hours a day. So you have to drink a ton, and thus you got to pee a ton. So every single stop, we would pull the sled for about an hour or 1 hour and 15 minutes, and then stop for about 10 minutes and eat, drink, and pee. So every stop I had to pee.
Are you guys talking a lot during this?
No, it was miserable. First of all, it was a featureless landscape. Okay, there was nothing to see. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was absolutely beautiful. But the North Pole, for instance, because it's frozen ocean and there's ice and currents make it jumble up, so you're climbing over like mountains of ice blocks, and it's beautiful. And there's some open water leads. In South Pole, it was literally nothing but white, 360 degrees. It's so cold that we have stuff over our ears, layers, hoods, jacket, goggles over our eyes, and stuff blocking our mouth that you can hardly even hear. You can't even hear anybody. And we're skiing in a single file line. So no, all you're doing is basically looking at the sled in front of you. And, every once in a while you're looking from side to side, but we're not talking at all. We took our breaks. We would, say a few words to each other, but you're so busy trying to get your drink in, take a bite to eat, and pee that we're virtually not speaking for 8 hours.
I saw you posted a picture of you and Alex Honnold. That was in this adventure, but where was that in the process?
Yeah, that was at Union Glacier. And he had just gotten back from climbing Mount Vinson, which is the highest mountain in Antarctica, and another mountain there. So he was getting ready to leave when I was getting there. So I saw him there.
How do you, as a guy who's done a lot of crazy adventures, how do you take someone like that? I mean, he's just at the upper echelon of, and I know, at least I would assume from his perspective, he's not taking the risks that we think he's taking because he's got a different skill set and he's got the practice in, etc. How do you perceive someone at that level of adventurizing?
Actually, that's the second time I met him. First of all, he's a super nice guy. Dude, he's in a total different universe as me. I'm an ordinary guy doing extraordinary things. He's an extraordinary guy doing even more extraordinary things. He is just in a planet all his own. And his skill and his, his mental strength must be incredible. I mean, I'm sure you saw Free Solo. I can't even hardly watch the movie without getting anxiety. I cannot imagine doing something like that unprotected.
Do you do any climbing in terms of like similar climbing, but with ropes and stuff? Or you're that's not your thing?
That's not my thing. No, I'm actually afraid of heights, believe it or not. A lot of people confuse what I do they think I'm an adrenaline junkie. I've never been on a roller coaster in my entire life. I am afraid of heights. I could never parachute, bungee jump, none of that stuff. So exposure makes me incredibly nervous, and I don't like to do. And, there is exposure on some of the mountains I climb, and it's pretty tough for me. Actually, on my Denali climb, I was so nervous about it. I reached out to a sports hypnotist to try to do some work with me to calm me down. And the guy actually refused to take me on because he said if he made me so comfortable and I fell and died, that he'd be responsible for that. I thought that was totally insane. I ended up just having to battle my own demons. But no, so I can't even relate to a guy like Alex. I mean, he's just in a whole other league.
So you're doing this 70-mile cross-country trek to the pole, to the South Pole. What are you doing with yourself to keep the mind in a certain place that you want to be in? You've done these kinds of things enough, but what are you doing with your mind in that kind of environment?
That's a great question. That's so funny you mentioned that, because when we got back to the tent every day, we'd laugh. I'd be like my buddy, Michael Hall, we call him Holly. I'd be like, Holly, what the hell were you thinking of for those last 8 hours? And we would laugh. And you could listen to music, but then you got to worry about keeping your batteries charged. And it was way too cold and a pain for that. So I listened to absolutely nothing. I just let my mind wander on anything that would take my mind off what I was doing. I thought about my business and what I was going to do when I went home and my family and nothing in particular, but everything. I think I solved all the world's problems and then forgot my solutions by the time I was done. But yeah, anything to take your mind off the absolute boredom of what we were doing in this particular one. Yeah, nothing in particular, but everything.
So you want to do Everest, though?
I do.
That involves some heights, though, doesn't it?
Oh, well, of course. And that involves some exposure as well.
Well, hold on. You say exposure to...
When I say exposure, I mean falling,
Right. Death.
Yeah, that kind of exposure. But, you're roped in. I mean, Everest is a lot safer than people think it is. There's hundreds of people that summit every year. And of course, the news is only going to tell you about the one or two that die. Most of them aren't falling anymore because you're roped in. And the Sherpa teams are doing all the work, setting all the fixed ropes. Most people have altitude sicknesses that get themselves in trouble now, but it's still pretty frightening if you're, have a fear of heights or a fear of falling kind of thing. It's definitely on my list. I mean, I read Into Thin Air like just about everybody, 25, 30 years ago, and always wanted to climb it. And I never dreamed that my life would turn out like this and I would be doing this stuff. But now I find myself in a position where, hey, it's the only one left. And, at this point in my life, I know a dozen plus people that have done it. So it's not as crazy as most lay people think it is. Of course, convincing my wife of that is not as easy as what I just told you. But
would that be the first adventure that you would do possibly in the future where you will have to see along the journey, you will have to see frozen people that didn't make it?
For sure. If you do Everest, you would be stepping over somebody just like me that also thought they weren't going to die and that they could do it, but something went wrong. So yeah, that's an eye opener for sure, but it's unavoidable.
That's probably part of where the wife starts to say, hey, right?
Yeah. Oh, admittedly, it's this very selfish pursuit. I admit that. And that's actually, if I do it, it's probably 3 years away. I'm trying to wait for my twin daughters to get a little bit older. I'm trying to balance them getting a little bit older and me not getting too old. And I know it is a selfish decision, but you're living this life and you've had a dream for 30 years. Do you put it to sleep or do you do what you can, train as hard as you can, try to make it as safe as you can, but try to do it and not think about it for the rest of your life. So that's kind of what I'm faced with.
Interesting that you bring up the word selfish. You use the word selfish, but you don't use it in a way where you're apologizing.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, because ultimately, every step that all of us take, no matter what, can be defined as selfish.
Well, sure. In my world, selfish is really anything that takes me away from my family that's unnecessary or that puts me in danger of something bad happening. But then again, we live in the U.S. We could be shot at a school, at a convenience store. We could be, I could be killed when I'm biking by a driver.
You just defined why I've been in Saigon for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you could get killed by a car here, okay, or a bus, but
I'm probably not shot.
That stuff doesn't exist here. So, yeah.
Yeah. So there's plenty of ways to get killed. I make the selfish decision to keep doing this stuff. I mean, of course, there's certain things I wouldn't do. I wouldn't climb K2, the second highest mountain, because that's way more dangerous. And I have a much higher chance of getting killed. And so I wouldn't do that. There's plenty of stuff I wouldn't do. But Everest just isn't one of them that I wouldn't do. At least that's the idea.
I think you've hinted at this a little bit in this conversation about age and, doing all these types of things. But I'm going to guess from a physical standpoint, look, I'm not doing anything what you're doing, but I do a lot of working out and I feel and am able to move a lot better than I could at age 25. And I know you feel the same way.
I do for the most part.
You put some extra scars on your body, though, than most people.
Yeah, right. And I certainly feel I can do way more than I could when I was 25. I wake up in the mornings feeling pretty stiff. But yeah, generally speaking, I mean, hey, look, we've reunited with old friends from, 40 years ago. And I feel like I can do a lot more than some people that don't do anything physically.
That was so diplomatic.
Right. I realized what I was saying, and I tried to pull that back.
Are you saying, Frank, that you don't look like an old man? Yes, that's true. I'll vouch for that. I've seen you in the last 2 months. You don't look like an old man. There you go.
Likewise. So congratulations to you. Yeah, your yoga and Pilates is working. But hey, let's be honest, there's some of the group that is not doing much and they look like they're not doing much, And so I prefer not to look out of shape. I take a lot of pride in being in good shape. What can I say?
That's a good jumping off point, though, because even beyond the world from where we came from and the people that we know, I think you can probably offer some. We've been doing it in this conversation, just people listening to you. They got to be saying, well, gosh, that guy just is so matter of fact. He just does it. He's just doing it. He just picks something and he goes to do it. And look, people should go check out your site and they can read the whole list of things you've done. But let me give a side tangent too. I don't know about you, but something has changed in the physical part of people that are younger than us. Here we are in our 50s, but I'm seeing a lot of guys in their 20s and 30s these days that look like sacks of shit. And I'm not sure what they're doing with themselves. Obviously nothing. This is true. This is true.
Oh, for sure.
How do you start to bring people in? I mean, you're doing it in this conversation. I don't know. Maybe it's just listening to you as the motivation. But are there any pearls of wisdom that you could give to people to start to bring them into your world? I mean, to bringing them into the first half marathon, other than just what you've said, which is, hell, I just wanted to do it. I did it.
The one thing I hear from tons of people that don't run or, they've always wanted to do a marathon. So many people always want to do one marathon, but they don't have time. That's what it is. I mean, don't have time. I've got twin 12-year-old girls. I've got 2 dogs. I got a business that I'm running full time. And I find time. I don't buy the I don't have time thing, or it's just not a good time. There is no good time. You have to make the time. You have to want it bad enough and make the time. Anybody can do it. And the other myth is that you need months and a year. Oh, I don't have a year to train for a marathon, for instance. I mean, marathon's like the easiest thing to mention because that's kind of like a bucket list, a marathon. It's not really a 10-miler, but you don't need a year to train for a marathon. Everybody has the physical ability to walk out your house and stumble 26.2 miles basically with no training. I mean, you have enough in the human body to get through that. The more you train, the less it's going to hurt, but everybody has time to do it. And the satisfaction and the confidence you get from doing something like that, putting yourself out there where you don't know if you could finish, but doing it, battling through the pain. I mean, the self-confidence that you would walk around with after that is many times worth over all you're putting into it. So I would just tell people, now's the time, because if not now, it could be too late. So I just tell people to do it. The way to do it is to just sign up, get motivated, find a race, get online and pay for it and put it on your calendar. And then you will find time to do it. Don't think about it and start training and then pick something, put it on your calendar, and it's going to be staring at you and you'll find time to do it. Trust me.
Let me take your confidence word to a different type of confidence. So you mentioned self-confidence, but physical confidence. And look, you're a guy, I'm a guy, so we're talking guy stuff. But the physical confidence from getting yourself into great shape. I mean, you got a lot of these poor guys in the last 30 or 40 years have been sold the story that they can be built like a pear and take Cialis and it's all going to work correctly. They might die from that shit. But there's something that I think a lot of men, especially as they age, they don't realize how much a testosterone boost you get from keeping yourself at some decent level of fitness.
I agree. I certainly don't know the medical aspects of exercise versus testosterone levels, but I can tell you just from being in shape at 55 and feeling good about yourself will certainly enhance anything. I mean, self-esteem, self-confidence, certainly physical ability, and endurance and anything if you're in good shape. I mean, a couch potato that's overweight and not doing anything, I can't imagine him or her feeling good about anything. If you can't look in the mirror and like what you see, that'd be a real bad way to start your day in my world.
By the way, I did not know your story I mean, I had heard bits and pieces, but we all get stuck in our life and this and that. And I'd heard bits and pieces, and I knew you had done some endurance stuff, but I wasn't really paying attention to the scale. And then we met and I saw that link and I was like, damn, okay, this is more than enough material for a conversation. Whether or not I've known Frank for a long time or not is independent of that. I'm an objective guy. I can look at the resume and say, oh, this is cool stuff.
Clearly, I haven't been sitting on the couch for the last 40 years.
No. I mentioned it when I saw you, but given your diversity of places that you've done, I'm telling you, man, you got to go from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, 2,000 miles of a coast.
That's been rattling around in my brain a little bit, but just getting back from the South Pole is not the time to bring that up to my wife.
With a black thumb. But on that trip, you'd have to take her and put her in Saigon where she can go to restaurants and stuff while you go do your thing.
Oh, yeah, clearly. Yeah, my wife is not. Some wives, I know friends that their wives go out and crew them for this type of stuff. And Chelsea would definitely not be my crew for anything. She would be the 5-star hotel waiter while I go and do it for sure.
Well, dude, it's awesome stuff. Really cool. I mean, I think the resilience part too is just, it's inherent in, I guess, the way you speak and going down this list. It's such an interesting thing because I've got in front of me, I have in front of me your list. I really didn't have any questions prepared. I just knew that we could open up a conversation and go in a lot of different ways. And you just describing the steps that you took, it's motivating. It's motivating to me.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
You lay yourself out. You're like, I wasn't doing anything special. I just said, I'm going to do it. That's a challenge to anybody. Anybody that's honest with themselves, if they hear that challenge, they're like, oh, shit. Why the hell am I sitting on this couch? Why am I watching the 15th NFL game this weekend? What am I doing? Why am I watching all these guys in shape and I'm completely out of shape?
Yes, right. And why am I wasting an entire Sunday where my team continues to lose and put me in a bad mood when I could just go out and run and get in shape? Exactly. Why do that? And, it's to be noted, lastly, that I am absolutely average physically. There's nothing special. I don't have any skills. There's no, my VO2 max is lower than any endurance. So I'm totally average and anybody can do the things I do. It's mostly mental and grit and stubbornness.
Do you have to take anything for pain at all? I mean, other than a few Tylenols here and there, is that your sum total of what you deal with?
Yeah, just a couple Tylenol here and there to maybe take the edge off. But no, I don't take any meds at all, including vitamins, which I probably should take. My wife's always, getting on me lately to take, and I just haven't bothered, but probably good for me. But no, I don't take anything.
The vitamin research is always so up and down. I never know if it's accurate or not. A lot of, there's a lot of different views on that. Where can we send people? People want to check you out, maybe throw some sponsor dollars at you in the future for a future adventure. If you've got a good charity going on something,
They don't sponsor average Joes like me, but it's always nice when I do a race or an adventure for charity. So that exposure is nice because I do like to raise money for kids with cancer and various things. I'm pretty big on social media. I've got just my personal page, Frank Fumich on Facebook, and then I have a Following Frank page on Facebook. And I do have my website, frankfumich.com, which has got just my bio, all the lists of everything I've done and some of the charities and stuff like that.
Very cool.
I hope I don't die of a heart attack next week, and then it'll all be for naught.
I doubt that's going to happen. But Frank, take care. We will catch up again after an adventure.
Great talking. Thanks, buddy.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.